Thousands of ships moved in perfect formation, each one bristling with weapons capable of reducing planets to dust. The battle was already decided before it even began, or so they thought. Then, without warning, a single human warship emerged from the black void. It was small compared to the alien behemoths, almost insignificant. Its hull was dark, its design sharp and angular, built for speed and precision. The alien commanders watched in amusement. A single ship. Against them, it had to be a joke. On the bridge of the alien flagship, Admiral Zorak leaned back in his throne-like chair, his scaled fingers tapping lazily against the metal armrest. His officers were laughing, sharing smug glances. They had crushed entire human fleets before. This would be no different. One human ship? Is this how desperate they have become? One officer sneered. Perhaps they are surrendering. Another chuckled. Zorak narrowed his reptilian eyes. Something about this didn't feel right. Humans were many things, foolish, weak, and reckless. But they were never suicidal. If they had sent a single ship, there had to be a reason. On board the lone warship, the AI known as ECHO processed 1,000 calculations per second. The enemy fleet was vast, but it was not invincible. Weak points had been identified. Attack patterns had been prepared. The human ship, named Vengeance, had been designed for a battle like this. The ship's lone pilot, Captain Elias Kane, sat calmly in the command chair. He had no crew. He didn't need one. His hands hovered over the controls, but most of the work was done by ECHO. The mission was clear. Strike first. Strike hard. Leave nothing standing. The alien fleet remained still, watching, waiting. Then, Vengeance moved. It was fast, faster than any ship they had ever seen. In a blink, it closed the distance between them. The alien sensors struggled to track it, their targeting systems lagging behind its unpredictable maneuvers. The ship's engines flared as it cut through the empty space, weaving through enemy formations like a ghost. Then it fired. A single shot. A beam of searing energy. It struck one of the alien capital ships directly in the center. For a moment, nothing happened. The alien officers smirked. Was that it? But then, the massive warship split apart. A fiery explosion erupted from within, tearing through its core. The mighty vessel was gone, reduced to a burning wreck in seconds. Silence fell over the alien command deck. Laughter vanished. The officers stared, their faces frozen in shock. One shot. One kill. Zorak shot to his feet, his tail twitching in agitation. Impossible, he hissed. Find out how they did that. Destroy that ship. The fleet responded instantly. Weapons locked onto the lone human vessel. The order was given. A storm of plasma bolts and missile barrages filled the space where Vengeance had been. Only it was no longer there. It vanished. The alien scanners screamed with errors. It had disappeared from all tracking systems. It was as if the ship had never existed. Then, another explosion erupted on the left flank. Another capital ship, gone. Panic spread like wildfire. Officers shouted over one another, scrambling to make sense of the impossible. One human ship was outmaneuvering, outgunning, and outthinking an entire fleet. A whisper of fear crawled through the alien ranks. This was not just another battle. This was something else. This was a nightmare. 0 second. The battlefield was no longer filled with laughter. It was filled with confusion, fear, and anger. The alien fleet, once an unstoppable force, now scrambled to understand what was happening. A single human warship had destroyed one of their capital ships in seconds and then vanished without a trace. On board the flagship, Admiral Zorak's claws dug into the armrests of his chair. His eyes flickered with rage as he watched the chaotic reports flooding in from his officers. Ships were repositioning, scanning the empty void where the human vessel had disappeared. The scanners found nothing. It was as if the ship had never been there. Zorak bared his fangs. Find them. Now. The officers obeyed, barking commands at their crews. The fleet's long-range sensors expanded their reach, probing space with energy pulses, seeking any sign of movement. The weapons systems remained fully charged, ready to fire at a moment's notice. Then, without warning, another explosion tore through the fleet. This time, it came from the rear. A battleship near the supply carriers erupted into flames, splitting in half as debris scattered in all directions. Gasps and shouts filled the command deck. "It's behind us," one officer yelled. The alien ships turned, weapons firing wildly into the darkness. But again, they found nothing. Panic grew. Their fleet was one of the strongest in the galaxy, built for planetary invasions, designed to crush enemy forces with sheer numbers. But now, they were fighting a ghost, a ship they couldn't see, a ship they couldn't hit. Inside the human warship, Vengeance, Captain Elias Kane remained calm, his fingers lightly tapping the controls. The AI, Ikiko, processed the battlefield with inhuman precision. "Enemy fleet is adapting," the AI's voice stated. "They are increasing sensor sweeps and randomizing weapon fire patterns." Kane smirked. "Won't help them." He pushed the ship forward, twisting through the battlefield like a phantom. The Vengeance was built with experimental stealth technology, its hull coated with adaptive energy fields that bent light and masked its presence from scanners. The ship didn't just disappear, it became unreadable, untouchable, unstoppable. Another target appeared on his display, a command vessel, coordinating fleet movements. He locked on. The ship's main cannon charged, glowing with destructive energy. One shot. The enemy ship erupted into a ball of fire, its bridge vaporized in an instant. The chain of command shattered. On the alien flagship, Zorak's breath came in sharp, furious hisses. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay in control. His officers were panicking, their voices rising in frantic terror. "Sir, we've lost 3 ships. We still have no visual on the enemy. The crew is losing morale, Admiral. Some are requesting retreat orders." Zorak slammed a fist into the control panel, his sharp claws scraping the metal. "We do not run from one ship." His voice silenced the panicked officers. "I want all remaining ships to form a defensive wall. Concentrate all firepower on the last known location of the human ship. Flush them out." The alien fleet adjusted their positions, forming an unbreakable blockade. Dozens of ships lined up, weapons aimed at the empty void where they believed Vengeance might be hiding. A deadly trap. If the human ship moved, it would be caught in a storm of energy blasts. Inside Vengeance, ECHO analyzed the situation. "They are trying to pin us down," the AI reported. "Probability of escape through conventional means low." Kane's smirk never faded. "Good. Let's show them what this ship can really do." He activated the secondary systems. Energy surged through the ship's core. The Vengeance had more than just stealth. It had speed beyond anything the enemy had ever faced. With a single command, the ship accelerated. From the perspective of the alien fleet, it was a blur. 1 second, space was empty. The next, a shadow streaked between them, faster than their eyes could follow. A thunderous blast ripped through the blockade as the Vengeance opened fire, cutting through their ranks like a knife through flesh. Another ship fell, then another. Panic turned into chaos. "They are inside the formation. Shields failing. We can't track them. Admiral, we're losing too many ships. We need tow." The officer never finished his sentence. A massive explosion rocked the flagship as a nearby cruiser was torn apart. The shockwave rattled the bridge, sending officers crashing into the walls. The lights flickered. Zorak stood in the middle of the chaos, his mind racing. He had underestimated this enemy. This was no ordinary human vessel. This was something else entirely. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Zorak felt something unfamiliar. Fear. The battlefield was no longer a war zone. It was a slaughter. Ships burned. Alien crews screamed. The mighty fleet that had once terrorized entire civilizations was now reduced to a chaotic mess, trying desperately to fight an enemy they couldn't even see. On board the flagship, Admiral Zorak stood frozen, his claws digging deep into the metal railing. The bridge was in chaos. Officers shouted over each other, their voices filled with panic. Screens flashed red, displaying ship after ship that had been destroyed. They were losing. No, worse than losing. They were being hunted. Where is it? Zorak roared, slamming his fist against the control panel. His voice silenced the terrified crew for a brief moment. Where is the human ship? A junior officer, his scales pale with fear, struggled to respond. We don't know, Admiral. It keeps disappearing. Our scanners detect movement, but by the time we lock on, it's gone again. Zorak's eyes burned with fury. A single human warship was making fools of them. They had prepared for a battle. They had expected a fleet. Instead, they faced something far worse, an invisible nightmare striking from the shadows. Somewhere in the abyss of space, the Vengeance moved like a predator among prey. Inside the sleek human warship, Captain Elias Kane watched the destruction unfold on his screens. He could hear the distress signals flooding from the alien ships, their desperate cries for reinforcements, for escape. But no reinforcements were coming. No escape was possible. They are breaking, ECJO reported, its smooth AI voice as calm as ever. Morale is collapsing. Some ships are attempting to flee. Kane smiled coldly. Not yet. We're not done. The Vengeance darted forward, its engines humming with power. It reappeared for just a moment, long enough to unleash another devastating attack. The main cannon fired, slicing through an enemy destroyer with terrifying precision. The ship exploded, sending debris scattering in all directions. The alien fleet's formation crumbled even further. On the flagship, Zorak could feel the fear creeping into his own heart. This was supposed to be a simple victory, yet his once mighty fleet was collapsing before his eyes. His officers were no longer shouting battle commands. They were whispering among themselves, their voices filled with doubt. He knew what they were thinking. This battle was lost. Zorak bared his fangs. No, he would not allow this. Prepare the obliterator cannon, he ordered, his voice sharp as a blade. The bridge crew hesitated. One of his officers turned to him, eyes wide. Admiral, the obliterator is still unstable. If we use it, we have no choice. Zorak snarled. Charge it. The flagship trembled as the massive superweapon powered up. The obliterator cannon was a devastating energy weapon, capable of vaporizing entire fleets with a single blast. It took time to charge, but if they could lure the human ship into its path, it would be over. A risky move. A desperate move. But Zorak was out of options. The energy core of the cannon began to glow, pulsing with deadly power. Every remaining alien warship received the same order: force the human ship into range. It didn't matter how many of them died. As long as they could bait the Vengeance into a direct shot, they could still win. Inside the human warship, ECHO detected the change instantly. Energy spike detected. The AI reported. Enemy flagship is preparing a superweapon. Kane's eyes narrowed as he studied the readings. A massive buildup of power. Enough to erase him in an instant if he got caught in the blast. The aliens were getting desperate. But desperate enemies made mistakes. He tapped the controls, shifting his attack pattern. The Vengeance disappeared once more, using its advanced cloaking systems to fade into the darkness. The alien fleet fired wildly, but their weapons found nothing. A voice echoed across the enemy communication channels. Where is it? Keep firing. Don't let it get close. We can't track it. It's... Another explosion. Another ship destroyed. Zorak's tail lashed in fury. The cannon was still charging, but the human ship was dismantling his fleet before it could finish. If they didn't fire soon, there would be no ships left. Increase power. Fire as soon as it's ready. The core of the obliterator cannon pulsed brighter. Energy crackled around it, shaking the entire flagship. It was almost ready. Just a few more seconds. But then, something happened that Zorak never expected. A warning siren blared across the flagship. The bridge lights flickered. The screens glitched. A deep mechanical voice filled the air. An unfamiliar voice. Target acquired. Zorak's blood ran cold. The human ship was inside the flagship's defenses. Kane had done the impossible. He had slipped past the enemy lines, past the sensors, and now the Vengeance was right above the flagship, aiming its weapons at the obliterator cannon. Zorak barely had time to shout. The human ship fired. A single devastating blast tore through the flagship's main deck, striking the unstable core of the cannon. For a fraction of a second, there was silence. Then, the energy within the weapon detonated. A blinding explosion engulfed the flagship, sending shockwaves across the entire battlefield. Alien ships were caught in the blast, their hulls ripped apart by the sheer force of the detonation. The once mighty fleet was reduced to burning wreckage in an instant. The human ship emerged from the destruction, untouched. The battle was over. But the war had just begun. Flames and debris drifted through the void, the remains of one of the most powerful alien fleets in the galaxy. What was once a force of unstoppable destruction had been reduced to scattered wreckage. Bodies floated lifelessly in the cold emptiness of space. Ships that had once carried the pride of an empire were now nothing more than shattered metal husks. And yet, amidst the ruin, one ship still moved. The lone human warship, Vengeance, hovered in the silence, its dark hull reflecting the dying glow of the battlefield. It had not just survived, it had conquered. Inside the cockpit, Captain Elias Kane watched the destruction unfold on his screen. His hands rested calmly on the controls, but his heart pounded with the thrill of victory. The enemy had never stood a chance. They had come expecting an easy battle. Instead, they had been torn apart. Enemy fleet, 93% destroyed, ECKO reported in its usual calm tone. Remaining forces are attempting to flee. Kane leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Cowards, he muttered. After all their arrogance, now they run. The remaining alien ships, what little was left of them, were breaking formation, each one scrambling to escape the battlefield. Some activated their warp drives, vanishing into hyperspace. Others limped away, their engines barely functioning. None of them dared to fight anymore. The battle had drained every last ounce of their courage. But Kane wasn't finished. "Target the retreating vessels," he ordered. "Let at least one of them escape. We need survivors to spread the story." "Understood," ECKO responded. The Vengeance moved again, fast as a phantom. A series of energy beams lanced through space, striking down the fleeing ships one by one. Explosions rippled through the darkness. Engines ruptured. Hulls cracked apart. One by one, the survivors were erased. But Kane left one ship untouched, a single battered frigate, barely functional, limping away from the battlefield. He let it run. "They'll tell their people what happened here," he said, his voice cold. "They'll tell them what happens when they challenge humanity." Far away, inside the wreckage of his once mighty flagship, Admiral Zorak clung to life. His once proud uniform was torn, his scales burned from the explosion. His bridge was gone. Most of his officers were dead. Only a few survivors remained, scattered across the ship's crumbling corridors, desperately trying to send a distress signal. Zorak coughed, tasting blood. His mind was still reeling from the shock of what had happened. This was supposed to be a victory. They were supposed to crush the humans, wipe them from existence. Instead, they had been humiliated. No, not humiliated. Destroyed. A single ship. One human warship had done this to them. One man had brought his entire fleet to its knees. For the first time in his long military career, Zorak felt true, paralyzing fear. He struggled to his feet, gripping onto a broken console for support. His claws trembled. He could barely move. His body screamed in pain, but he forced himself to focus. He had to survive. He had to warn the others. The human ship was unlike anything they had ever faced. It was not just a weapon. It was a predator, a ghost, a force of nature. If humanity had more ships like this, if they had more warriors like the one commanding it, then the Empire was doomed. Zorak limped through the ruined corridors of his flagship, dragging himself toward an emergency escape pod. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Fires flickered along the walls. His crew, what few remained, looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. They had no orders to give, no strategies to follow. Their minds were broken, shattered by what they had just witnessed. Zorak didn't care about them. He didn't care about the battle anymore. All he cared about was survival. He collapsed into the escape pod, slamming the launch button with the last of his strength. The pod ejected, hurtling away from the battlefield, spinning through the void. Inside, gasping for breath, Zorak stared at the screen. The human ship remained still, watching. For a brief moment, he thought. No, he knew that the pilot inside Vengeance was looking right at him. That human knew he had survived, and he was letting him go. Why? A chill ran down Zorak's spine. It wasn't mercy. It wasn't pity. It was a message. They wanted him to go back. They wanted him to tell the others. They wanted the entire galaxy to know what had happened here today. The lone human warship had entered the war, and the enemy would never recover. The escape pod drifted through the void, its tiny engines barely functional as it limped away from the wreckage of what had once been the mightiest fleet in the sector. Inside, Admiral Zorak lay slumped against the cold metal walls, his chest rising and falling with painful, shallow breaths. His body ached. His scales were burned, his uniform torn, his pride shattered. But he was alive. The human ship had let him go. That thought haunted him more than anything else. He had stared death in the face, had watched his fleet be torn apart by a lone warship, and yet the human had spared him. Not out of mercy, not out of weakness. It was a warning. Zorak forced himself to sit up, gripping the edges of the pod's control panel. His claws trembled as he activated the distress beacon, sending an encrypted signal toward the nearest Imperial outpost. His message was simple. The fleet is gone. The human ship, it cannot be defeated. Hours passed. The stars blurred as the pod drifted toward the safety of Imperial space. Eventually, a response came. A warship intercepted him, bringing him aboard. Medical personnel rushed to treat his wounds, but nothing they did could erase the horror in his mind. Soon, he was standing before the High Council, the rulers of the Empire. Their cold, reptilian eyes studied him from their thrones, their expressions unreadable. They had expected him to return victorious. They had sent him to crush humanity's resistance. Instead, he had brought them only a story, one that none of them wanted to believe. A single human ship did this, one of the council members hissed. Zorak lowered his gaze. Yes. Laughter erupted from the chamber. Some of the council members scoffed, shaking their heads. Others whispered among themselves, dismissing his words as the ramblings of a defeated soldier. Impossible. Another counselor sneered. No warship, no matter how advanced, could destroy an entire fleet. Zorak's fists clenched. His jaw tightened. Then send another fleet, he snapped, his voice raw. Send more warships. See for yourself. But I promise you, they will not return. Silence followed. The laughter died. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. For all their arrogance, they were not fools. They saw the fear in Zorak's eyes. They heard the truth in his voice. And they knew, deep down, they were not ready for this war. But pride was a dangerous thing. The Empire does not cower before a single enemy, the High Chancellor finally declared. His voice was firm, unwavering. We will respond with overwhelming force. We will send our strongest fleets. We will crush this human resistance before it can spread. Zorak wanted to argue. He wanted to warn them, to make them understand that brute force would not work against this enemy. But he saw it in their eyes. They had already made their decision. And so, he said nothing. The Empire would learn the truth soon enough. Far from the Empire's borders, in the depths of uncharted space, the Vengeance traveled in silence. Kane sat in his command chair, studying the data on his screen. The battle had been a success. The enemy fleet was gone. The survivors would spread fear among their own kind. But the war was far from over. Ishicho, Kane said, his voice calm. Status report. Enemy distress signal was intercepted. The AI responded. Admiral Zorak has been retrieved. The Empire is mobilizing. Kane smirked. Good. Let them come. He had wanted this. Humanity had spent too long on the defensive, fighting off the Empire's attacks, losing ground, losing people. That time was over. Now, the Empire would know fear. Now, they would understand what it meant to be hunted. The Vengeance was just the beginning. Deep within hidden human territories, warships were being built, faster, stronger, more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Humanity had been pushed to the brink, but instead of breaking, they had evolved. They had adapted. And soon, they would strike back. Kane leaned back, gazing at the stars ahead. This war would not be fought on the Empire's terms. It would not be won through numbers or brute strength. It would be won through fear, through precision, through the kind of warfare the enemy had never seen before. And when the time came, when the Empire finally realized their mistake, there would be no escape. The vastness of space stretched endlessly in every direction, but for the Imperial Armada, there was only one path: forward. Hundreds of warships moved in formation, their engines burning bright against the cold darkness. This was not just a fleet. This was a declaration. The Empire had heard Admiral Zorak's warnings, and instead of retreating, they had gathered their might. They would not be intimidated by a single human ship. They would not be ruled by fear. At the heart of the fleet, aboard the massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion, Grand Warlord Korath observed the battlefield ahead. He was no politician. He was no cowardly council member who sat on a throne, debating strategies from safety. He was a warrior, forged in the fires of conquest. His name alone was enough to make entire species submit. And yet, as he stared at the empty void before him, something felt wrong. The target ship has not been detected, one of his officers reported. Scanners show nothing but wreckage from the previous battle. Korath's jaw tightened. They had tracked the human warship here. They had come prepared. And yet, their prey was nowhere to be found. Zorak had warned them. He had told them that this human ship was unlike anything they had faced before, a predator that struck from the shadows, leaving only death in its wake. Korath had dismissed his warnings as the cowardice of a defeated man. But now, standing on the bridge of his dreadnought, surrounded by the strongest fleet the Empire had ever assembled, he felt it. The quiet, the waiting, the unseen eyes watching from the darkness. Maintain formation, Korath ordered. Keep all weapons primed. A cold silence filled the bridge. The officers obeyed, but tension spread through them like a disease. They were warriors, trained for battle. But this was something different. They had fought fleets before, conquered planets, crushed rebellions. But now, they were hunting something they could not see. Then, without warning, one of the ships exploded. It happened in an instant. One moment, the heavy cruiser Velox Wrath was holding position. The next, it was gone, its hull split apart by a blast that had come from nowhere. Alarms blared across the fleet. Officers shouted over each other. Weapons were aimed in every direction, searching for an enemy that wasn't there. Where did that come from? Korath roared. Unknown. His tactical officer responded, panic in his voice. Scanners detected no incoming fire. Another explosion. This time, a destroyer. Its engines ruptured, sending it spinning out of control before it was torn apart by secondary detonations. Korath's blood boiled. This was no battle. This was a massacre. All ships, defensive positions. He barked. Do not fire blindly. Find the target. More ships fell. A frigate vanished in a fireball. A battleship's shields flickered for a moment before its hull was carved open by an unseen force. The fleet was unraveling. And then, at last, the Predator revealed itself. The Vengeance appeared in the middle of the formation, its dark hull flashing into view like a ghost emerging from the void. Before any of the Imperial ships could react, it struck. A single, concentrated burst of energy ripped through a nearby warship, severing it in half. As the pieces drifted apart, the human ship vanished again. Panic spread through the Imperial fleet like wildfire. It's inside our formation. We can't track it. Shields are useless. It's cutting through us like. Another explosion. Another ship lost. On the Eternal Dominion, Korath clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms. He had never felt fear in his life. Not until now. This is impossible, he muttered. One ship cannot do this. One ship cannot. A voice interrupted him. A deep mechanical voice that echoed across their communication channels, filling every ship in the fleet with its chilling presence. One ship is all it takes. Korath's blood ran cold. The human was speaking directly to them. He was inside their systems. He had bypassed their security. Shut him out, Korath ordered. Block all transmissions. But it was too late. On every screen, across every ship in the fleet, a single image appeared, real-time footage of the wreckage surrounding them, the shattered remains of their warships, the bodies of their soldiers drifting lifelessly in space. And then the message, this is your last chance. Leave, or be erased. Korath bared his teeth in fury. I do not take orders from vermin. He snarled. All ships, focus fire on that warship. Destroy it now. The fleet obeyed. Energy weapons lit up the void, converging on the Vengeance. But the human ship was already moving, vanishing into the shadows once more. The beams struck only empty space. Then the killing began again. One by one, the Imperial ships fell. Their shields meant nothing. Their weapons fired at ghosts. Their strongest warships, their most elite warriors, they were nothing before the monster that hunted them. Minutes passed, then hours. And by the end of it, only one ship remained. The Eternal Dominion, once the symbol of Imperial strength, now drifted alone in the darkness. Every other ship in the armada was gone. The fleet had been reduced to silence. Korath stood frozen on the bridge, staring at the destruction around him. His officers were dead. His weapons were useless. He had lost. A final transmission appeared on his screen. No threats. No warnings. Just 5 words. Your empire dies with you. And then, the Vengeance fired one last time. A single, precise shot. The Eternal Dominion erupted in flames, torn apart from within. Its wreckage joined the graveyard of ships that now littered the void. And as the last remnants of the Empire's might burned away, the lone human warship vanished once more, slipping back into the darkness. The war was no longer a war. It was an extermination. The galaxy would never forget. The empire that had once ruled the stars with an iron grip was gone. What had taken centuries to build had been reduced to silence in mere weeks. Their fleets had been torn apart. Their strongest warriors had fallen without ever landing a blow on their enemy. Their colonies, once sprawling across entire sectors, were now nothing but burning husks. The war had not ended with negotiations. There had been no peace treaties, no desperate surrender. There had only been vengeance. Deep within the ruins of the Empire's homeworld, a single figure moved through the devastation. Admiral Zorak limped through the shattered remains of what had once been the Imperial Command Center. The grand halls, where war strategies had been planned and victories celebrated, were now nothing but rubble. Smoke filled the air. Fires still burned in the distance. The capital city, the heart of the empire, was lifeless. He had returned, but there was nothing left to return to. Zorak had known this would happen. The moment he had escaped the battlefield, the moment he had seen the power of the lone human warship, he had known there was no future for his people. But the council had refused to listen. The warlords had clung to their arrogance. And now, they were all dead. A sound echoed through the ruins, the deep hum of engines descending from the sky. Zorak turned his gaze upward. Through the clouds of smoke, he saw it. The vengeance. It had come, just as he knew it would. The sleek black warship hovered above the ruins, its shadow stretching across the dead city. It had no escort, no support fleet, because it didn't need one. This ship had done what no armada could. It had ended an empire. Then, for the first time, it landed. Zorak felt his chest tighten as a single figure stepped out of the warship. Human. The one who had orchestrated all of this. The one who had turned the most powerful empire in the galaxy into nothing more than a cautionary tale. Captain Elias Kane. The human walked toward him, his boots crunching against the shattered stone. He wore no armor, carried no weapons in his hands. He didn't need to. The war had already been won. Zorak forced himself to stand straighter, ignoring the pain in his body. His once proud uniform was in tatters, his medals meaningless now. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Kane finally broke the silence. "It's over." Zorak exhaled slowly. "It was over the moment we crossed you." Kane didn't argue. The empire had been mighty. It had ruled with absolute power. It had crushed worlds, enslaved civilizations, and wiped out entire species without remorse. But it had made one fatal mistake. It had underestimated humanity. "We could have coexisted," Zorak said, his voice heavy. "We could have shared the stars." "You chose war," Kane replied. His tone was not angry, not mocking. Just final. "And war is what you got." Zorak let out a bitter laugh. "And now we are nothing." Kane watched him, his expression unreadable. Not nothing. A warning. A gust of wind blew through the ruins, carrying the ashes of the fallen into the sky. Zorak knew what Kane meant. The empire had ruled through fear. It had believed itself untouchable, unstoppable. Now, every surviving species in the galaxy had seen the truth. They had seen what happened when you pushed humanity too far. "Do you intend to wipe us out completely?" Zorak asked. There was no pleading in his voice, no desperation. He was ready for whatever answer came next. But Kane shook his head. "No, there's no need. The empire is gone. The survivors will never rise again." Zorak believed him. There was nothing left to rebuild. The empire was finished, not because of a lack of soldiers, not because of a lack of ships, but because it had lost its spirit. The fear it had once instilled in others now belonged to humanity. The galaxy would move on. New powers would rise. New alliances would form, but no one would ever forget the lesson of the Empire's fall. Kane turned, walking back toward the Vengeance. Before he boarded, he spoke one last time. "If the survivors are wise, they'll stay away from us." And with that, he was gone. The Vengeance lifted off, vanishing into the sky like a phantom. Zorak stood alone in the ruins of his people, watching as the last shadow of humanity's wrath disappeared into the endless void. The war had begun with a single human ship. And now, the universe would never be the same.